I've been driving OTR for 14 years. Started when I was 23 because my uncle got me a job with his company hauling dry goods up and down I-80, and I never really stopped. If you've never done long haul, I'll tell you the honest truth about it. The driving isn't the hard part. The hard part is the being alone. You spend 10, 12 hours a night with nothing but your headlights, your CB, and whatever's rattling around in your own head. Most nights that's fine. This is a story about the one night it wasn't. This happened 2 winters ago, hauling a refrigerated load of produce from a distribution center outside Salt Lake City down through Nevada, headed to Barstow. I'd done that route probably 60 times in my career. I could practically drive it with my eyes closed, which is a dangerous thing to admit, but it's true. I know every gas station, every rest stop, every stretch where your phone loses signal. I bring this up because it matters later. It was a graveyard run, left around 9 p.m., so I'd hit Barstow by early morning before the heat came up and started stressing the reefer unit. That stretch of highway between Ely and Tonopah is about as empty as driving gets in this country. You'll go 40, 50 miles without seeing another set of headlights. The desert out there doesn't have streetlights. It doesn't have much of anything. Just the white line and the sound of your own engine. Around midnight, I picked up chatter on the CB from a driver going by the handle Yellow Jacket. Nothing unusual about that. You talk to people on the radio to stay awake, complain about the DOT, ask about weather ahead. He said he was running a similar route a few miles behind me, hauling steel coil. Said he'd been on the road 19 hours and was fighting to stay awake. We talked for maybe 10 minutes. Normal stuff. Then mid-sentence, while he was telling me about a diner in Tonopah that stays open all night, his voice just stopped. Not static, not a dropped signal. It cut off clean, like someone had unplugged something. The last thing he said was, "Hang on, there's somebody standing in the..." And that was it. I keyed my mic and asked if he copied. Nothing. I tried again a few minutes later. Still nothing. I told myself his radio died or he lost the tower, which happens all the time out there. But something about the way his voice just stopped, mid-word, sat wrong in my stomach. I kept glancing at my mirrors after that, which is a stupid habit when you're on an empty 2-lane highway at midnight, but I couldn't help it. About 20 minutes later, I noticed a set of taillights way off in the distance ahead of me. Red dots, barely visible, sitting right where the road curved out of sight. I didn't think anything of it at first. But I watched them for the next 15 minutes, and they never got closer, and they never got farther away. I was doing 65. Whatever that was should have either pulled away from me or I should have caught up to it. It just hung there in the exact same spot on the horizon, like it was pinned to the windshield. My GPS said the next services, a 24-hour truck stop with a diesel island and a diner, were 42 miles ahead. I remember checking that because I wanted a coffee bad. But not 10 minutes later, I came around a bend, and there it was. Lit up, fluorescent, sitting right off the shoulder like it had always been there. I checked my GPS again. It still said 42 miles. I want to be clear, I wasn't tired. I hadn't been drinking. I know how that sounds, and I've turned it over in my head 100 times since, and I still don't have an explanation for it. I pulled in anyway, because a truck stop that materializes early is still a truck stop, and I needed to get off the road and clear my head. The lot was almost empty, which was strange for that hour. That stretch usually has 3 or 4 rigs parked overnight. There was exactly one other truck there. A steel coil hauler. Same setup Yellow Jacket described. I sat in my cab staring at it for a solid minute before I got out. The engine was running. I could hear it idling from 20 feet away, that low diesel hum, but the cab was dark and the windows were fogged up thick like someone had been breathing in there for hours with the heat off. I knocked on the driver's door. No answer. I walked around to check the plates, and that's when I saw the driver's door was open about 2 inches, just hanging there. I should have walked away right then. I've told myself that 100 times since, but I pulled the door open and looked inside because some idiot part of my brain still thought maybe the guy had a heart attack or something and needed help. The cab was empty, no driver. But his logbook was sitting open on the dash, pen still resting on the page, like he'd been interrupted mid-sentence, same as the radio call. The date at the top of the page was today's date. But the entries below it, in the same handwriting, were dated 11 years earlier. Same route. Same mile markers, same stops. It was like watching someone write the same trip twice, 11 years apart, in the same notebook, on the same day. That's when the CB in his cab crackled to life. Not mine. His. Sitting right there on the dash, powered on, speaker hissing with static. And through the static I heard his voice, the same voice from 20 minutes earlier, say 5 words. Don't come back for me. I didn't wait to hear anything else. I ran back to my truck, locked the doors, and sat there with my hands shaking on the wheel. I tried my phone, no signal, even though I'd had 4 bars pulling into the lot. I tried the CB. Dead air. I looked back over at the coil truck, and the engine had shut off. No sound at all now. Just silence, and the hum of the fluorescent lights over the empty diner that, I noticed for the first time, had no lights on inside, and no cars in the lot besides ours. I put my truck in gear and started pulling out, and that's when I checked my mirror one last time. The coil truck was gone. Not driven away, gone. There was no dust, no taillights receding into the dark, nothing. Just an empty patch of gravel where it had been parked 30 seconds earlier. Standing in that empty patch of gravel was a man. Tall, in a flannel jacket, the kind every trucker owns. He wasn't moving. He was just standing there facing my truck as I pulled out onto the highway. I told myself. I imagined it. I told myself a lot of things in the next 10 minutes, trying to explain away what I'd just seen, because the alternative was something my brain didn't want to hold on to. I was doing 70 down that highway, faster than I should have been running a full load, and I kept checking my mirrors, and for a while there was nothing. Then I saw him in my side mirror. Running. On the shoulder, keeping pace with my truck at 70 miles an hour, which is not something a human body does. He wasn't gaining, but he wasn't falling behind either. He stayed level with my driver's side door for what felt like an entire minute, and I could see, every time I glanced over, that his head was turned toward me, watching, even though the rest of him was pumping like he was sprinting. Then my CB crackled once, just once, and a voice that sounded exactly like mine, using my real name, not my handle, asked if I could pull over and help him log his hours. I didn't pull over. I put my foot down, and I didn't look at that mirror again until I saw actual lights ahead, real ones, a real truck stop with real trucks parked in it, and real people inside. When I finally pulled in, my hands were shaking so bad I could barely get my seatbelt off. I went inside, and I must have looked like hell, because the woman behind the counter asked if I needed her to call someone. I told her what happened, or most of it, because at that point I wasn't sure how much I trusted my own account. There was an older driver sitting at the counter, must have been pushing 70 years old himself, nursing a coffee, who didn't even look surprised. He asked me if I'd seen the taillights that don't get closer. I said yes. He asked if I'd stopped at a truck stop that showed up early. I said yes. He just nodded slowly and told me that stretch of road has a reputation among drivers who've been running it for decades. He said a driver went missing out there in the 90s. Coil hauler, radio call cut off mid-sentence. Truck found abandoned on the shoulder with the engine running, and nobody ever found inside or out. He said every few years somebody comes in off that road looking exactly the way I looked. I asked him what the man in the flannel jacket wanted. He said nobody who's seen him has ever stuck around long enough to ask, and the ones who did stick around never came back to tell anybody what the answer was. I should have left it there. I know that now. But I couldn't sleep for 3 days after, and the not knowing was worse than the fear, so I did something stupid. I looked up old news archives for that stretch of highway, searching every combination of words I could think of. Missing trucker Nevada highway, coil hauler, 90-something. Most of it turned up nothing, just dead links and forum posts from people who'd heard the same secondhand story I had. But on the 4th night, I found a scanned newspaper clipping from a small local paper, maybe 400 words long, dated almost exactly 11 years before that night I pulled off the road. A driver named Daniel Voss, 34 years old, had been reported missing after his rig was found running on the shoulder near mile marker 214. His logbook was recovered at the scene, open to that day's date. No other details, no follow-up story, nothing. The paper had folded not long after, and there was no way to find out if they'd ever located him. I sat there staring at that name for a long time. Then I did something I regret even more than looking it up in the first place. I keyed my CB, sitting in my own driveway at 2 in the morning, and I said his name out loud into the microphone. Daniel. I don't know why I did it. I think some part of me needed to know if it would answer. It didn't answer with words. But the radio, which had been dead silent, let out one long burst of static, exactly like the burst right before I'd heard my own name out on that highway. Then it went quiet again, and stayed quiet, and I unplugged the unit from the wall and didn't touch it again for a week. I don't run that route anymore. My company reassigned me without much of a fight once they heard why. Dispatchers hear stranger things than mine, believe it or not. I still drive nights. I still listen to the CB out of habit. But about once a month, usually somewhere quiet, somewhere with no other rigs around for miles, I'll hear a burst of static come through, and just before it clears, I swear I hear my name, not my handle. My real name, said slow, like someone's reading it off a page. I never answer. I want to say up front that I've hauled refrigerated freight for almost 9 years, mostly regional runs through the Midwest, and in all that time I've had exactly one night I still can't explain. I've gone back and forth on whether to even write this down because I know how it sounds. But it happened, and it happened to me, and I'd rather put it somewhere than keep carrying it around by myself. It was late October, hauling a full trailer of packaged meat from a processing plant in Iowa to a distribution center 2 states over. Standard run. One I'd done a dozen times before. My usual route had me passing through a way station on Route 9 around 1 in the morning. I knew that station well. It had been closed for renovations for almost 8 months. Orange barrels stacked at the entrance, a plywood sign nailed over the old one that said, "Temporarily closed, use alternate scales." That night, coming up on it, I noticed the lights were on. Not just the parking lot lights, all of it. The scale house, the inspection bay, the overhead sign. Bright and humming like it was any normal shift. I remember slowing down, confused, because I'd driven past that dark building every week for months. As I got closer, the sign out front, the one that flashes open or closed for approaching trucks, was lit up and blinking open, steady and clear, no flicker, no sign of the plywood that had been nailed over it for months. I didn't have much choice. If a way station's open and flashing, you pull in, or you risk a fine that'll follow you for months. So I pulled onto the ramp and rolled up to the scale. A man came out of the station house to meet me. He was wearing a reflective vest and a company jacket, standard inspector gear, and he waved me forward onto the scale with a flashlight, same as every inspector I've dealt with 100 times. But something about the way he walked bothered me before I could even say why. It was too even. No sway, no shift in weight from one leg to the other, like he was gliding across the gravel instead of walking on it. He asked for my paperwork through the window, and I handed it over. He looked at it for a long time, longer than any inspection I'd ever had, flipping through pages that should have taken 10 seconds to check. When he finally looked back up at me, I got my first real look at his face under the station lights, and I wished I hadn't. It wasn't disfigured or anything dramatic like that. It was just wrong. Too smooth in places, too still, like a mannequin somebody had painted expressions onto instead of a face that actually moved. He smiled at me, and the smile didn't reach anywhere near his eyes. He told me my paperwork checked out, but that he needed to inspect the trailer before clearing me to go, standard procedure for refrigerated loads after dark. I'd never once had a station asked to physically inspect a sealed reefer trailer at that hour, not in 9 years, but I wasn't in a position to argue with a man holding a clipboard at a lit way station, so I climbed down and walked with him to the back. That's when I noticed the parking lot. Behind the station house, half in shadow, there were 3 other trucks parked in a neat row, engines off, cabs dark, nobody around them. I hadn't passed a single truck on the highway in either direction for the last hour. I don't know where they came from, and I didn't get a good enough look to check the plates before the inspector called my attention back to the trailer doors. He broke the seal on my trailer without asking, which is something that's supposed to require a signature and a reason logged on paper, and pulled the doors open. The cold air rolled out in a thick fog, same as always. But before he even stepped up to look inside, he asked me, very calmly, if I'd opened the trailer at any point during my drive. I told him no, the load was sealed at the plant, and I hadn't touched it since. He nodded slowly and said that was strange, because according to my own temperature log, printed right there on his clipboard, the internal trailer temperature had spiked for almost 40 minutes sometime around midnight. The exact kind of spike you'd get from the doors being opened, then dropped back to normal right before I reached the station. I hadn't stopped once that whole drive. I told him that. He just looked at me and said, "Then who opened it?" He climbed up into the trailer with his flashlight, and I stood at the doors watching the beam move across stacked pallets of meat, and about halfway back, the light stopped on something and held there. He didn't say anything for almost a full minute. I finally asked what he was looking at, and he stepped aside so I could see for myself. Scratched into the inside wall of my own trailer, in long, deep gouges through the metal, was a series of marks that looked like they'd been carved by fingernails, dragged downward in sets of 4, over and over, covering almost the whole back wall, not from outside. From inside. The kind of marks that only make sense if something had been trapped in there, clawing to get out, for a long time. My trailer had been sealed at the plant. Nobody could have been inside it. I hadn't heard a single sound the entire drive. I asked him what could have done that, and when I turned to look at him for an answer, he wasn't standing behind me anymore. He was gone. Not walked away, not ducked around the trailer, just gone, the same way the coil truck vanished on that other night I still haven't fully made peace with. The flashlight he'd been holding was sitting on the trailer floor, still on, rolling slightly with the vibration of my idling engine, light pointed straight at those claw marks. I didn't wait around to file whatever paperwork he'd started. I climbed back into my cab, pulled the trailer doors shut myself without resealing them, and got back on the highway doing well over the limit until I saw real lights again, an actual open truck stop with actual people in it. The following week, back at the terminal, I asked our safety manager about the station on Route 9, mentioned the renovation must have finished early. She looked at me like I'd said something absurd, and told me that station had been permanently decommissioned almost 15 years ago, condemned after some kind of incident nobody in the office seemed to want to describe in detail, and that the building itself had been sitting empty and fenced off ever since. She pulled up a satellite photo to prove it. Weeds through the cracked lot, no lights. No sign. Just a collapsing scale house with the roof caved in on one side. I still run that route sometimes because I don't have much choice in the job I have. But I take the long way around now, adding almost 20 minutes to the drive, just so I never have to pass that stretch of Route 9 after dark again. And every few months, without fail, I find myself checking the inside walls of my trailer before I leave the yard, running my hand along the metal, telling myself, I'm just being careful. I'm never sure what I'm checking for. I just know I have to look. I still think about that load every time I drive through northern Montana. Not because of what I saw. Because I never found a single piece of evidence that it actually happened. I've told this story to a few other truck drivers over the years, and every one of them had the same reaction. They'd sit quietly until I finished, then ask me one question. Why didn't you call the police? The truth is, I don't know what I would have reported. That I picked up a man who wasn't supposed to exist? That my dash cam somehow erased the only part of the trip that mattered? Or that the shipping company whose trailer I hauled that night had apparently shut down almost 15 years earlier. It happened during my second year as an over-the-road truck driver, back when I'd take almost any load that paid well. I was running a refrigerated trailer from Billings, Montana to Spokane, Washington. It was late October, cold enough that patches of snow had started collecting along the shoulders, but the roads were still clear. Around 10:30 that night, dispatch called. They asked if I'd be willing to make a quick detour before heading west. Another driver had broken down on an old stretch of highway that eventually connected back to the interstate. He had a mechanical failure and needed someone to bring him a replacement air hose that another company driver had left at a truck stop. It sounded simple enough. The detour would cost me maybe 40 minutes. They even offered an extra $200. I accepted without thinking. The farther I drove down that highway, the less traffic I saw. Within 15 minutes, I hadn't passed another vehicle in either direction. The road narrowed, the trees closed in, and eventually my GPS lost its signal altogether. That wasn't unusual in that part of Montana. What was unusual was the CB radio. It kept picking up the same transmission every couple of minutes. It wasn't static. It wasn't another driver talking. It was someone breathing, just slow, steady breathing. Then the channel would go dead again. I switched frequencies 3 different times. The breathing followed me every single time. At first, I assumed someone nearby had a powerful radio that was bleeding into multiple channels, but I couldn't see another truck anywhere. A few miles later, I spotted hazard lights ahead. A dark blue semi was parked on the shoulder exactly where dispatch said it would be. The driver was already standing outside waving his flashlight. He looked to be in his late 50s, wearing an old reflective jacket with faded stripes that barely reflected anymore. I handed him the air hose through the passenger window. He thanked me, but didn't immediately walk away. Instead, he leaned closer and asked something I wasn't expecting. "You came down here alone?" I laughed. "Yeah. Why?" He looked past me toward my sleeper compartment. For a few seconds, he didn't answer. Then he quietly said, "I thought I saw somebody sitting back there." I turned around immediately. The sleeper was empty. When I faced him again, he looked embarrassed. "Sorry," he said. "Long night." He grabbed the hose and walked back toward his truck. I pulled away. I had driven maybe 3 miles when my phone buzzed. It was dispatch. The woman sounded confused. "Where are you?" Heading back. There was silence. Then she said, "Ham? The driver canceled almost 20 minutes ago." I frowned. "What do you mean canceled?" I literally just handed him the hose. "No," she replied. "He got towed before you even reached him." I remember looking into my side mirror. The road behind me stretched perfectly straight for nearly a mile. There were no headlights. No flashing hazards. Nothing. The truck I'd just stopped beside was gone. I looked back into my mirror so fast that I nearly drifted onto the shoulder. There wasn't a single light behind me. No hazard flashers. No parked semi. Nothing but an empty stretch of highway disappearing into the trees. I actually slowed to almost a stop, thinking maybe I'd somehow passed a curve without realizing it. But there weren't any curves. The road was perfectly straight. I grabbed the CB. "Dispatch, you're telling me that driver was already gone?" "Yeah," she replied. "The tow company picked him up about 20 minutes ago." "We tried calling you, but you were out of service." I didn't answer. I was too busy trying to understand how I'd just spent several minutes talking to someone who supposedly wasn't there. Then something caught my eye. The passenger seat. Lying there was the driver's flashlight. The same heavy metal flashlight he'd been holding when he waved me down. I know it wasn't mine because mine was clipped beside the driver's door. I hadn't noticed him leave it. I pulled onto the shoulder and picked it up. It was old, scratched to hell, and had someone's initials carved into the side. RC. I figured he must have accidentally dropped it into my cab while I handed him the air hose. No big deal. I'd turn it in at the next terminal. About 10 minutes later, my fuel light reminded me I needed diesel anyway, so I stopped at a truck stop just outside Missoula. Inside, I mentioned the flashlight to an older cashier. He looked at it for maybe 2 seconds before his expression changed completely. "Where'd you get that?" I explained everything. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he quietly asked, "Did the driver have gray hair and an old orange reflective jacket?" I nodded. He leaned both hands on the counter. I knew him. That immediately got my attention. He drove for Rocky Crest Transport. The initials on the flashlight suddenly made sense. RC. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. He died out on Highway 2. About 12 years ago. I actually laughed because I thought he was joking. "I'm serious," he said. Brake failure. Truck rolled into the ditch. They never figured out why he stopped waving traffic down instead of getting away from it. He stared at the flashlight again. "That's his." I told him there had to be some mistake. Maybe another driver from the same company. He simply shook his head. Rocky Crest went out of business the year after he died. I left without saying another word. Back in my truck, I checked the dash cam footage. I wanted proof that I'd stopped. Proof that I'd spoken to someone. The recording showed me pulling onto the shoulder. Then, without any interruption, it jumped ahead almost 9 minutes. There wasn't a glitch. The video simply skipped those minutes entirely. When it resumed, I was already driving away. Alone. No blue semi. No driver. Nothing. The passenger door, however, opened by itself on camera just before I pulled away. Like someone had climbed out. I still have that video saved on an old hard drive. Mechanics have checked it. They've never found an explanation for the missing footage. As for the flashlight, I didn't keep it. The next morning, I left it on the counter at the trucking terminal with a note explaining where I'd found it. When I passed through there a month later, I asked the terminal manager if anyone had claimed it. He frowned. What flashlight? The one I left here. He insisted nobody had left anything. I even checked the security cameras with him. The footage clearly showed me walking into the office. It showed me standing at the counter. It showed me leaving. But my hands were empty the entire time. I haven't taken another detour for dispatch since that night. If a load requires me to leave the interstate after dark, I turn it down. I don't care how much it pays. Because every once in a while, usually around the same part of Montana, my CB radio comes alive for a few seconds. No voices. No static. Just slow. Steady breathing. Like someone is waiting for another driver to stop. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and share it with someone who loves real-life horror stories. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next terrifying story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.